Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Think Future. My name is Chris Kalaboukis, and once again, we're coming at you live from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We're talking innovation startups, the future, not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. If you're watching on YouTube, smack that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when a new show comes online. And when you're listening on your favorite podcast service, please subscribe and please drop a note in Apple Podcasts. I greatly appreciate it. So, we are slaves to productivity. Total slaves to productivity. And I don't know why we're total slaves to productivity. Maybe it has something to do with our work ethic. Maybe it has something to do with our culture. I don't know what it is, but we are slaves to productivity. It's like everything that's out there that purports to improve our productivity becomes a huge success. Everyone is so interested in being productive. Now, I think that's great. I think it's absolutely important to be productive at certain times. There's sometimes, for example, when you're innovating, when you're designing new products, when you're building completely new things that have never been built before, new to the world things, sometimes you have to go to the land of no productivity, the land of uselessness. Let me give you an example. So, patents have to have a certain set of criteria, and one of those criteria is usefulness. So, if the idea is not useful, then it doesn't really qualify as a patent. For example, if I wrote up a patent for a glass hammer, people would look at it and go, well, that's a great idea, nice art piece, but what could I do with a glass hammer? A glass hammer is completely useless. I cannot use a glass hammer to knock in a nail. Every time, in fact, as soon as I use that glass hammer to knock in a nail, it'll shatter. A glass hammer is a useless object. Now, I'm not saying that it is not an interesting object. I'm not saying that it might not be an interesting art piece. I'm not saying that it doesn't have meaning. All I'm saying is that it's not very useful, right? And that's one of the things that is pretty much required when it comes to patentability. New patents, new ideas, new products have to have a purpose, have to have a use. Now, some could argue that a glass hammer does have the use of bringing beauty into the world because it's a piece of art. So, sure, it has that kind of a use, but it's not something that could be patentable. It's not something that's useful in that regard. But think about it for a second. To get to the point where we're actually building something useful, we may have to go through all sorts of iterations of things that are not useful. If you look at the story of almost every successful product, it's gone through iterations and iterations and iterations and pivots and pivots and pivots until it's reached some type of product market fit where it meets and becomes useful to the market. But before that, maybe it was useless. Maybe in order to expand our minds into the product space that's beyond what's out there today, we need to drop our productivity act and think about building things that are useless. Because those useless things may eventually lead us to things that are useful. We have to get it out the door. See, this is one of the things that always bugs me when it comes to startups. A lot of times, people think that they need to perfect the product before it goes out the door. Oh, it's got to have this feature, and it's got to have that feature, or the customers won't buy it unless it has this feature or that feature. So you keep changing and iterating and iterating and changing and changing and iterating internally without actually getting it out the door to know if the market needs to look at. You're looking at it and you're going, this thing is useless. It's not going to do what the market is looking for. But you are not the arbiter of that. The arbiter is the market, is your customer, is the person who's going to buy your product. So you're not the person who decides whether it's useful or useless. I mean, I'm sure when they first developed Twitter, somebody probably thought, well, that's useless. What are we going to do with that? You can only do 160 characters. And look at where it is today. Look at where it is today. So see what I'm saying? Is that sometimes you have to explore uselessness in order to get to the usefulness. Because the usefulness is the hard part. That is the part that's really, really tough. And when you're doing productivity, if you're thinking productivity, you always want to be useful. You always want to be useful. So being useless for even a little bit of time so that you can build or envision those innovative new products, that will get you in the right direction. So uselessness is not a negative. Uselessness is a tool to get you to that final end game of the product that you want to build, that new billion-dollar business that you want to get out the door. Explore uselessness first before you decide to make it useful. And maybe the market will make it useful for you. You never know. I mean, that's happened many times where a product is pushed out the door and the founders are like, what are we going to do with this? Who's going to use this? And then suddenly it's just taken up and people love it. You never know. It's like they say, a plan, doesn't matter how good your plan is, it doesn't survive contact with the enemy. It doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how useful you think your product is. It will not survive contact with your customers. Create something useless, get it out there, and see if your customers like it. Then pivot and pivot and pivot until you reach the product market fit. But don't wait. Get the damn thing out there. If you're embarrassed by it, that's probably a good thing. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.